guest tonight is Katrina Shawver, who shares her debut work, The True Story of Henry Zguda.
Yes.
I did it. A Polish swimmer who survived 3 years in Auschwitz and Buchenwald and went on to live in America to live his dream. When Katrina met Henry, he was 85 years old, with an exceptional memory, with a pragmatic gallows humor, and a sense of hope. He showed her how to truly live for today. Katrina Shawver wrote hundreds of newspaper columns over the 11 years for the Arizona Republic. She holds a BA from the University of Arizona in English and Political Science, and she says she excelled in the School of Trial and Error. She had a variety of previous careers in software support, paralegal work, tax preparation, answering phones for a forensic psychiatrist. That must have been interesting. And has presented at community college level on Poland under Hitler and Stalin. I am very pleased to present to you the author of Henry, a Polish swimmer's true story of friendship from Auschwitz to America, Katrina Shawver.
Thank you, Kenneth. I can't wait another 15 years to get this again. I'm going to have to do another book. Dobry wieczór, witamy, good evening, and welcome. Tonight is a celebration. It's a book launch, it's a signing, and it's also a salute to the person who gave me a great story in the first place, Henry Zguda. And in the spirit of a party, I do have a few door prizes I'll hand out at the end of my talk. I will also leave time for questions at the end. I also have a book someplace that I'm doing a reverse signing. It's my copy, and I'd be honored if everyone here signs it. I'm not sure where it is. There it, okay. It's a hardback, and it does say book lunch on it, so don't buy it. I'd like to recognize some dignitaries in the room before I go. Bogomil Horshem, Honorary Consul for the Consulate of the Republic of Poland in Phoenix. And his lovely wife, Elizabeth. Elizabeth is president of the Polish American Congress for Arizona Division. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. I have my teacher voice, and I've never been a teacher. One thing I'm honored to announce tonight that I have not put out on social media, the Arizona Talking Book Library, which is a division of the Arizona State Library, has already selected Henry for addition to its collection of the talking books for the disabled and the blind. This is really, really cool. I went down and met with them and looked at the studio. They love when local authors do this because they like them to read a little bit in the beginning. And once that is done, it will be uploaded to the Library of Congress and available to anyone in the country who qualifies for those devices. I also need to introduce and thank my husband, Rick, who is trying very hard to hide in the back. This would not be possible without his support and his patience in listening to stories of Henry for so many years. If Henry Zguda was alive today, he would be 100 years old. Soon there aren't going to be many survivors left from World War II. That includes our own U.S. veterans, our Navajo code talkers, anyone else who experienced that time period. So those stories are incredibly valuable right now. That I even have this story has been a walk of total instinct and faith and sheer luck. As Pinna said, I met Henry when I was writing for the Arizona Republic on a phone tip. And that was in November 2002. After one meeting, I went home and I knew several things. He had been a competitive swimmer in Poland and successful at a time when swimming really was not a big sport at all. I knew that he had survived Auschwitz and Buchenwald as a Catholic and in a unique capacity, but you have to read the book to know what that was. He claimed to have attended high school with Pope John Paul II. Am I interested? Yes. And I did address that in the book. He was likable and easy to talk to, but most importantly, the trigger for me was that he had no children, no siblings, and he had told his family no one cared about the story and to throw everything out. Like you, it got to me. And for whatever reason, I went home and I talked to a friend. I met this guy, and she's like, well, maybe you're the one that's supposed to get it. So I did. I called him up and said, let's write a book. Be careful what you ask for in life. Be very careful. When I began, I didn't know what I didn't know. I'm not Polish, Jewish, or Catholic. I'd never interviewed a concentration camp survivor, and I don't remember ever learning about Poland in school. In those times, it was behind the Iron Curtain, and we just didn't talk about communist countries. So I really was starting with a blank slate. Eventually, I realized I could not finish this book with authenticity without visiting Poland and Germany. And I did do that with my husband in 2013. And there are things I learned there that you simply cannot learn without being there in person. As my father-in-law said, why are you visiting 2 concentration camps? It's a vacation. I said, yeah, but this is special, and I kind of know what's going on. I'm honored to have all of you here, and I also believe this book is particularly timely in a troubling way. There's an increase in anti-Semitic incidents out there in this country and overseas. There's been open marches of white supremacists, even as recently as November 11 in Warsaw. We've been down this road. Hate and prejudice have led to murder before, and it's still going on. I hope this book is a reminder that not only did that happen, a lot of people were targeted, and no one was safe for who they were. One of the things I learned is World War II was devastating to Poland, Jews and Poles alike. 6 million Poles lost their lives, 3 million Jewish, and 3 million Christian. I can't even conceive of that number. For Poland, that was 20% of the entire population and 90% of the Jews. Tragic. There's just no other word. One of the things also that's important to remember is that 150,000 Poles were deported to Auschwitz. It was originally a detention camp for political prisoners and Poles. 70,000 Poles died in Auschwitz. Many others were transferred out, and their death counts are counted elsewhere. But I want to make sure that isn't lost as we study the Holocaust and these camps as far as what happens. From this book, I'm going to stand against any person who dares say the Holocaust did not happen or was exaggerated. It most certainly did. Henry was a witness. There's irrefutable proof. And I believe all Holocaust denial is based jointly in hate, prejudice, and ignorance. There's no other way I can explain it. We need to keep teaching against the lessons of hate and prejudice by remembering and honoring the very real victims and survivors. In that sense, I consider this book an important contribution to the history of the time. As to how we remember history and victims, I would love if just once, when I tell someone about this book, I don't hear the phrase, well, if he wasn't Jewish, why was he arrested? Because Poland, to be a Pole, you were arrested. You were an enemy of Germany and of Russia. Does anyone know who the first people were that Hitler arrested? Anyone? Nancy? No. Hitler rose to power in, I believe, January or February 1933. 2 months later, he opened Dachau. And the people he arrested were German communists including the president of the German Democratic Communist Party. What he did is whoever ran against him in the election, he just arrested him and put him away. The next group he went for were Jehovah's Witnesses. Does anyone know why Jehovah's Witnesses? Yeah.
They were neutral.
They were neutral. They refused to enroll their children in Hitler booths, and they would not swear allegiance to Hitler. They kept their God, and so they were arrested. And then the main provocation against Jews began in 1933, but the final solution in strategic murder and mechanized everything that we all know really didn't begin until 1942 after the Wannsee Conference. And a lot of people lose that in the history as far as how it's told. Even before World War II began, Hitler and Stalin were both determined to erase Poland from the map of Europe once again. Both Germany and Russia have been historical enemies of Poland for centuries. She's situated geographically between them. And in about 400 years, the boundaries changed about 40 times. As some conquered, some won. Some conquered, some won. And I always ask Poles, based on where you live, how do you identify? You know, if you're Silesian, are you German in this decade? Are you Polish in this decade? So I've come to understand, and anyone who's Polish, please correct me, it's something you carry in your heart. Whoever your culture is and how you were born, I think that's how you identify. How do you destroy a country? One of the first things you do when you want to destroy a country is you kill and arrest the leaders. And that is one of the first things Hitler did, and Russia, once they invaded Poland. Germany invaded Poland September 1, 1939. What we're not always taught is Russia invaded 2 weeks later, September 27. And basically, the country was split in half and again was erased from the map. Along with leaders, that meant professors, star athletes, chief plumbers, military, attorneys, anyone who commanded respect in the community who was educated. In Poland, which was also a Catholic country, that included Catholic clergy. They weren't arrested necessarily because they were Catholic, but in the community they were respected individuals. And if people listened to them in rebellion, well, it was safer to arrest them and put them away. I don't know how many people know this, but there are 2 Catholic saints who were martyred in Auschwitz, Father Maximilian Kolbe and Saint Teresa Benedicta of the Cross. I encourage you to look them up because they're pretty amazing stories. The bottom line is, under Germany and under Russia, no one was safe. No one was safe. And Poland really did not come out unscathed out of the entire incident. In the summer of 1939, 3 things happened in Henry Zaguta's life. He turned 22 years old and he renewed his identification card. In the summer, he was on a date with a girlfriend in a park and he was beaten up for looking like a Jew. I don't know why you can look at someone and decide, I certainly can't, but he was beaten up for looking like a Jew. Now here's Henry and what I liked about him. He went to the YMCA where he was an athlete the next day with a black eye and teeth. His friend Kaggio said, Henry, I know what we're going to do. He rounded up 2 boxers. He rounded up 2 water polo players, rounded up 2 weightlifters. They went back to the park, went looking for what he referred to as the Jew beaters, and beat them up. The other thing that happened is he was involved in the YMCA, and that was one of the first YMCAs in Poland with an indoor pool. During the summer, it was like a dorm of sorts, and Krakow has excellent universities, so students would come and stay there while they were studying. When the bombs came off on September 1st, the first thing he did was run to the YMCA to be with his friends. Where else would he go? What do you know? All the German students had been studying for summer school were wearing their Gestapo uniforms. They spoke excellent Polish, and they knew who everyone was. He and a friend took off out the back door, and they went running. Now, unfortunately, remember I said Russia invaded 2 weeks later? Everyone in the city and in Poland was racing to get to Russia, away from Germany. Well, if the Russians are invading and Germany's invading, really there's not much left but to go home. There's no place to go. 3 years later, he was arrested on the streets. His only crime was being Polish. Germans don't tell you why they arrested you. He was a strong young man. Better to arrest and detain than have strong young man fighting against you. And excuse me, I am thirsty. Thank you. Okay. He was on a dark street one night. A truck came along with soldiers in front of it holding out their guns. And he tried to be funny. They asked him, "Are you Jewish?" "No." "Are you Deutscher?" "German?" "No." He said, "Old Deutscher," meaning old German, because Poland had been German at one time. They didn't like that. Kind of got a punch in the face, shoved in the truck, and what do you know? They had arrested a bunch of athletes from the YMCA. He was a swimmer. There were basketball players there. He was arrested with other athletes, and he knew them. After 2 weeks of interrogations, he and the other Poles who were deported arrived at Auschwitz in June 1942. Some of you may be familiar. There's an arch over the main entrance that says Arbeit macht frei. In German, that means work shall set you free. It was a German's joke. Sorry, they invented it at Dachau. Henry's reaction, because you need to remember, we all know now what happened. Back then, land was cleared away from Auschwitz. They actually cleared away Polish farms, evicted them, tore the houses down and farms, and that's what they built Auschwitz on. It was hidden. No one knew what was going on. You didn't know about this place. So when he came under this arch and he saw a couple friends outside working, "Work shall make you free," he sighed a big sigh of relief. He was a hard worker. How bad could it be? Well, we all know now. When they came in, prisoners were given their uniforms. They were given numbers. 39551 was Henry's. That's what you become, a number. And sent to the prison block. Now, on the back of the book, I have his prison photos. You won't see a Star of David on his shirt because, of course, he wasn't Jewish. What you will see is an upside-down triangle. From the beginning of Dachau in 1933, the Germans came up with a very easy identification system, triangles. They meant different colors. If you were black, you were against Hitler. If you were green, you were the criminals and murderers. If you were red, you were political prisoners, which is a definition for everyone else, pretty much. And most of Poles arrested were political. Now, how I came across these pictures, and this is what made interviewing Henry so much fun. I never knew what was coming out. He came out one day and he pulled out these 3 photos in a prison thing. They're kind of taped over. And I'm looking at it and I'm like, "Henry, these are original." He's like, "Yeah." I said, "What are these?" And he explained to me what his photos were. And I'm like, I'm thinking these need to be in a museum. But I'm like, "Henry, how did you get those?" He said, "Simple. He went to the trials at Nuremberg. There was a book of them, and when Noah was looking, he took them." He said, "They're my pictures anyway." What can I say? Auschwitz in 1942, when he arrived, was still half Polish as a prisoner camp. a detention camp. It was after the Wannsee Conference in the winter of 1942 that it became a killing center. To Henry, death was an equalizer. Dead is dead. Murdered is murdered. He watched many friends die there. And he did observe in many instances that Jews were often treated even worse. The Polish underground, and he was pretty well connected if you read the book, they saved who they could. They had little tricks. If someone was ill and there was someone in the hospital, they'd take and hang a typhus sign over their bed, because Germans were petrified of typhus. So they had ways they could save people for a while. And, you know, they were smart. Now remember, these are all young guys. He was arrested when he was, by then, he was 25. A lot of those people were young. These are not old people going in. I have children in their 20s, and when I look at them and try to imagine knowing where they were or not knowing where they were, it hits home. It does hit home. There were many there. In the beginning, the main languages of the camp were Polish and German. And if you spoke German, you succeeded much better. You had longer life expectancy because you got to understand the guards. If you didn't understand the order, you know, what they told you to do, they just beat you up for being a stupid peasant. But Henry had 6 years of German from high school. That was very key in his survival because he could follow orders. You know, basic high school, but he could follow orders, and there's other ways that came into play. But Henry had a very pragmatic logic. There were so many languages in the camps, but really, everyone spoke the same language, a punch in the face. Who can argue with that? He was just very pragmatic. He was only in Auschwitz for 9 months. He's like, so little time, so many stories. In 1943, as the Germans ramped up Auschwitz, they shipped a lot of Poles westward into German concentration camps, and they were different. When I say Buchenwald was a different brand of evil, it was indeed a different brand of evil that I really don't want to write about. But a lot of these camps in Germany trained SS guards and trained the other camps who would then become guards in the camps in Poland. They were trained, they were trained to be heavily anti-Semitic, to be brutal, to not really care. That was where they got their training. When I visited Buchenwald in 2013, that one got to me. I knew what Henry described. I knew what I had gotten there. Auschwitz, I was too well studied. You couldn't surprise me because I knew too much. I knew someone who was there. Buchenwald was lonely, hidden in the woods, and that was when I went back to my hotel room. And I cried. It's like so many people forgotten and we'll never know. And that one really got to me. One thing I liked about Henry, he refused to be defined by his nearly 3 years in German concentration camps. In fact, this book does not end with the war. He made me promise that because he said those were only 3 years. There were so many more good years. Don't just write the bad years. Some of you may have read this already. You may notice that even in a concentration camp, Henry had a sense of humor. He has stories that are not your typical Holocaust story. He did carry a certain humor. There was an underground life. There was chess in the camps. Sunday afternoons, the guards were off. They didn't want to spend time guarding prisoners. So there was an underground culture of sorts, depending on who you were and where you were. One thing I remember he said from Buchenwald, in some ways Buchenwald was better. Communists were in charge, but also there were sons guarding their fathers. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, remember, Germans were arrested back in 1933, the communists. So 10 years later, when their children come along, they have no option but to join the army. And there were situations where, of course, the sons are not going to shoot their fathers and friends. That was a concept I never even thought of, because again, in Germany, you had no choice. And some of those dynamics are things I've never read anyplace else, but Henry brought to light. I've asked myself several times, how do people work in Holocaust museums? How do you serve as a tour guide in a concentration camp and do that 40 hours a week? I had trouble listening to Henry some of the time. I just wanted to turn the book and close the book and look further. But I stayed with it because I wanted to honor Henry and everyone else who didn't have the option to close that book and turn the page. So I heard some pretty brutal things. But you know what? I wasn't there. So even what I heard is nothing compared to what some of those people went through. And again, when I talk long-term imprisonment, remember I said Hitler arrested the communists in 1933. The head of the German Communist Party was imprisoned for 11 years in camps until he was executed in 1944. You know, the Jewish experience was you're shipped and you die. People don't realize there were long-term imprisonments there, and that's why a different culture also developed. But when I visited Auschwitz, I met with the head archivist, and I asked him that question. And he said, basically, actually, I do want to read this because his words were excellent. I recorded them and got permission to include them. He says, I've been working here since 1997. I know that behind each record, each document, each photograph, there is a special kind of human life story, alive, with plans for the future. We know one day there will be nobody, no survivors. So those documents, those materials, texts of stories, they're very important. They will be evidence and very important voices for the next generation when there will not be a possibility to meet a survivor, any survivor. I thought that was poignant, and he just hit the nail on the head. And I think I related to that because that's part of what kept me going, is Henry's story represented a lot more people. This was one man's story, but it represented a lot more. Now, Henry only lived for 1 year after I met him. And truthfully, when I interviewed him, there were so many words I wrote down phonetically because I don't know who in here actually, I do know who in here speaks Polish. But for us English speakers, I just would write down phonetically what they were. 10 years later, when I went back, I was like, oh, so that's what that is. Oh, so that's what that is. And I understood a whole lot more. Now, okay, this is a spoiler alert. Henry survived. Okay? Spoiler alert. He eventually defected to the US in the late 1950s with a friend. So again, Henry is always pulling out different things. So one day he pulls out this. And it's a picture of a ship, and on the back side it says United States Lines. And on the inside there's a menu. And their signatures. Well, before he left, one of the things he wanted to have was a tuxedo. Because he knew if he was going to America, he was going to meet important people. So he basically left with a suitcase with a tuxedo, not many other clothes, almost no money. And when he gets on the ship, through some machinations of Polish vodka, he was invited to the captain's table for New Year's Eve dinner. So the people that he autographed were Arabs and Indian and princes and all these important people. He's like, they never knew. He fit right in. And that was Henry. There's so many questions I would ask him now that I can't go back. I ended up doing a lot more research. I've read a lot of books. I have not found one like Henry's. First of all, a lot of it is first person. And it's my asking questions. Okay, I'm a writer. But I also have to understand the context of what's going on. So I had to balance interrupting him with trying to understand what was going on. So this book is written sort of in an interview format to mimic that. But it is first person. After he died, I became very good friends with Nancy, his widow. And so I got to say, Henry was always in my life. Because we would talk about Henry. She became a very good friend. And that kept the story alive, even when I set it aside. You know, life happens. You have kids. You have a sick mom. You get on overwhelm and say, what the heck did I say I do? There is no way I can do this. Now, my friend Nancy, who is sitting in the audience, had heard Henry's stories. And you got to understand my mom. When I talked to her, I said, I met the most interesting man. She said, man? What do you mean you met an interesting man? So I didn't tell her a lot about Henry, but my friends heard Henry's stories. After I went to Europe, I came back and I started blogging as a way to write this story. And after about 4 months, Nancy, who is one of my soul sisters and knows me, said, Katrina, we just learned to put up with you. For this guy you met, for this Henry. But now that I've seen what you have to finish. And that was such validation. There are more than 80 original documents and photos in this book. And I can give you highlights, but the only way you're going to get the real story is to buy the book. By agreement with several museums, I can only use those in print. They will never go in a video. They will never go online or social media. They're protecting their copyright, and one I even paid for. So to really get the full effect, you do need the print. You need to read the book. And it is available in hardback, paperback, ebook. I'm available for book groups. Okay. With the publication of Henry, I realized that while I outlived him, now that I have his book, his story is going to outlive me. And that's incredibly a powerful feeling. I have a note that Nancy wrote me, and I'm debating whether I can read it without crying, but I'm going to try. I was looking for some papers recently, and I found a little scribbled note from his widow that she wrote me in 2011 as she was sinking into dementia. Dear Katrina, I loved you from the day we met. Okay, I mean, I get through this. You are so easy to know, so pleasant, so smart. Why wouldn't I want to hang around with these people? It is no wonder that Henry took such a liking to you. He actually became a different person when we both got to know you. I myself was just as pleased as he was. It pleased me so much to have you help him write or speak about his past. Our life together was even better because of my understanding what he had been through. You see, Henry, like war survivors, our veterans, you don't want to talk about it. Or you'll tell the good stories, and you're going to spare your family the details. So that was an eye-opener as I got to know Nancy, that she's like, Katrina, I didn't know that, but you got the story out of him. And then she went on to say, it comes as an honor that you will write about him. You not only made him happy, but you made me love him even more because I knew what he had been through. It is so validating for me to look out in this room and see people I know, see people I don't know, and I thank you for your time on a Tuesday night. I'm going to answer questions in just a moment. I want to ask who in here knew Henry? And if you would raise your hand, Pat, Al, Jamie, my daughter, Bernie. 15 years later, I finally finished. And it is incredibly validating because I go to the senior center and they're like, aren't you that woman that's writing a book? So whatever happened to that book? So I'm just incredibly glad there are still a few people who knew Henry that can see the end product of this. Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you for sharing your Tuesday evening with me. And to Henry and Nancy, I raise a toast and say Nostrovia. Cheers. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Is Nancy still alive?
No, unfortunately, Nancy lived for 10 more years. She passed away in 2013. And it was kind of sad. She had 4 nieces who were pretty much spread across the country. Pat Libby in the front row and I actually planned Nancy's funeral. We contacted the priest. I wrote the obituary. It was very lonely, but just by word of mouth, 50 people came to her memorial. Some because they knew Nancy, but most because they remembered Henry. And even the priest said, promise me you'll give me a copy of the book. He knew Henry, and he said both their masses. So, yes, no. And actually, at that memorial, I realized, okay, finish it or live with it. Shelved away. And I really realized, based on a couple relatives, I'm the only one holding this story in trust. So I was now in a position that we could book airfare to Poland, and it happened very quickly. And I've been working on it ever since. Up until this summer, that was on top of a full-time job. So, yeah, I'm very proud.
So
Lord.
did Henry do any swimming when he moved here to the United States?
Excellent question. Yes.
Okay.
He was a swimmer beforehand, and he was an athlete. And after the war in 1945, the communists came into power. So one of the things the communists did is they arrested any Poles left. Anyone who had worked against the Nazis and survived the war, they arrested them and pretty much executed them. They didn't want anyone fighting for Poland. So an arrest warrant was issued for Henry. He hid, and then a friend got him a job. You'll love this. He said, I went from into the mouth of the lair. Someone got him a job as the chief swimming coach for the Polish army in Warsaw. So he became a swimming coach. And when he came to this country, no matter where Henry went, he knew people. I mean, this was like Forrest Gump, but for real. So he comes to the United States. The first person he meets, Henry, how are you? And 2 days later, they got an appointment with a doctor at a rehab hospital. And this wouldn't happen today, but she's like, I know you. You know the body. Come be a physical therapist. Okay, really? But yeah, so he really did stay an athlete and trainer his entire life. I even have a medal that I found that, in going through his stuff, he was very active in the Arizona Senior Olympics, in tennis, and I believe in swimming. I remember meeting someone at church. You knew Henry? Oh, he was good. No one could beat Henry. So I actually have one of his medals, and when he was alive, he actually glued his picture to it. So this is kind of like winning the gold medal. Any other questions? Yeah.
Was he in the other camp until he was liberated after the war, or?
Correct. He was in Buchenwald, and actually, as the Americans were approaching Dachau, Buchenwald, these other German camps, what the Germans did is they basically evacuated prisoners on death marches. The Russians did that to Auschwitz. The Germans did that to, God, I don't want to tell you the whole story. I want you to buy the book. But yes, it was kind of ugly after. As the Germans were ending the war, it was really pretty ugly. And actually, he then experienced 2 more camps before he was liberated. He nearly died. He lost all his teeth, malnutrition, but he made it. So, anyone else? Yeah, Dee.
Favorite memory of him? What's your favorite memory?
What is my favorite memory? He made me laugh. It was fun to interview him, and I was so fascinated that here's this man who had been to hell and back, and he lived this fabulous life because his attitude was, it's behind me. I'm looking forward. And I think that was the attitude that also drew me in like a sponge to kind of absorb that. I hadn't experienced that a lot in a lot of people I know. And so he made me laugh. Yeah. So, Bill.
Did he become a U.S. citizen? And
He did.
tell us a little bit about that. Maybe?
He became a U.S. citizen, I believe, in 63 or 64. He came here on New Year's Eve, 1958, so 59. He was married a year later. His wife was not Polish. She was Italian from the Bronx. She sounded like my grandma Gertrude with her accent. But in his papers, because his family knew I was writing this, so thankfully they gave me his papers. And later I translated them, but I found his letter from Nelson D. Rockefeller, congratulating him. And actually, my friend Don Griffith, who does genealogy, looked up Henry. He actually found the ship's manifest, where it says, Henry, stateless, the date he arrived. And so that was pretty cool, too. You just never know what's out there. Anything else? Going once? Yeah.
I'm actually just gonna, if I'm not mistaken, I've probably known Katrina longer than anyone in this room. I've known
There's one other, but that's okay.
I've known Katrina
You don't know her, so that's okay.
I've known Katrina since high school.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna tear up. I just wanna say how incredibly proud I am of you for sitting. I don't know anyone else that can do this, and she has put her heart, her soul, her money into this book, and it shows, and it will, to think that this story will live literally forever, as long as there is the written word, I think is incredible.
Thank you. I paid her. Not really, no. Thank you, Nancy. Lori,
So what's your next project, Katrina?
you know,
You can take a rest.
I don't. I have a passion for capturing stories, and I have learned so much on Poland. I would love to utilize that knowledge and perhaps find another survivor who's still alive and do that story. It would not take me 15 years. There's writing software out there I didn't know about for the mechanics. I already know so much. Technology is better. I was using cassette tapes. Okay, at least I could use a digital voice recorder now. So I'd love to capture someone else's story if they're still around. And if not, this has been such a walk of faith. I cannot tell you in the last 3 years. It's like, okay, Lord, if this is supposed to happen, open doors. I don't know what those doors are, but just keep opening doors. And He's opened some amazing doors. And so I figure my next book is going to fall into my lap. I'm going to meet the right person. I don't know who that person is yet. But God, I'm getting such a high off of this. I have to do another book. This is fabulous. Going once. Roman.
Have you made any plans to have the book translated and issued in Poland also?
That is an interesting question. I would like to. It requires finding a foreign agent for the country of Poland. It is on my wish list. I actually got an email from someone who was educated at Warsaw University. He's head of the Chopin Foundation. He's head of Paderewski, who are Polish artists. He emailed me and said, "You missed one date."
Oh.
And I said, "Great, can you show me the reference in English?" And it's not in English. Because that's my caveat. I only speak English. So my resources are limited to what I can locate. And I'm sorry, when you're trying to track down a minor athlete in 1932 to verify something, it is very hard. Devin.
That actually, I wanted to ask, what was the hardest single piece of research to track down and accomplish?
Some of his stories in Auschwitz that were like so incredible with prisoners who are no longer there. How do I verify what he told me? And that meant going to Auschwitz. So I would ask the archivist, was there a Bloody Michael as one of the capos? He said, why, yes. And was this prisoner here? I had some other prisoner names, and I sent those on ahead before I went. And I was stunned at stacks of records on his other prisoners. And I was fortunate to have an excellent Polish interpreter who sat there, and one of these prisoners was so notorious that a PhD student, a doctoral student, had written a PhD thesis on this one student. And that was unexpected gold, because that verified two stories that I could not have verified. Early on when I started this, I went to a writing group. Someone was trying to help me. And it wasn't coming together. And this person said to me, wow, didn't you let an old man bend your ear? How do you know it's true? That was the first time I shelved it. Because that was actually exactly right. I'm a journalist. You have to check your sources. How do you check these sources? Well, yeah, that was something that also added on to the incredible research. If I was going to meet someone from Poland, I better know what I'm talking about, or at least know the right questions to ask. And I was very fortunate. I went to a Polish festival at Our Lady, I can't never say it. How do you say Częstochowa. And I met a gentleman there who got me to Krakow. I've since been introduced. I was honored to be a guest at the Polish Heritage Ball 2 weeks ago. It was just, Poles know how to throw a party. They really do. I have a friend, Elena Thornton. She is from Russia. And before the first ball, she bought me a really glittering necklace because she's like, I want you to match Eastern European women because they know how to wear bling. And that is the necklace I wore 2 weeks ago. Diane? Oh, no, anyone else? Okay. I am happy to sign books. Pin is going to put me at that table. I will stay as long as I need to. I just am so thrilled to see everyone here. I do have a clipboard with a sign up for my email list, not the store's, but mine. I would love if you signed on. That is the easiest way to know what's going on for me to reach you. I post blogs. I try to keep them interesting. They are not always about me or Henry. I'm starting to do author interviews, other Polish authors. So I'm expanding out. I like to write content. I'm a newspaper writer. I'm really good at 600 words. Anna, I turn it over to you.
Okay, from
Yes.
Katrina, yes. So lovely.
So, does anybody want to go away? Excuse me.